gonna discuss a couple things. It's kind of a tangent, kind of not. I'm gonna discuss technically two different things that I think, not sure how to phrase it. Some people feel very strongly about, some people some people are very much against, and some people don't really have a stance, and then some people are really kind of like, they can be very polarizing, and I am not a very polarized person on these things. So, I think in a couple of videos I've kind of referred to myself as boring. Why? Because I don't really have extreme stances on a lot of things. I don't really have polarizing stances. And I'm not one for like sensationalism and exaggerated speech and stuff like that. So I kind of mean it when I say I'm boring. And these are, so I'm saying this might be an example of it. Yeah. So, and I've kind of gotten that throughout life. It's like, people will take very extreme stances and then they'll provide mine. I'm like, that's kind of boring. I'm just like, boring is necessary survival. It's the boring stances that, it's the glue that holds everything together. It might not be the majority, especially for really polarizing topics, but without the glue that can actually be boring and communicate to both ends of the polarized, society doesn't really survive. So it's just kind of partially a survival thing, partially it's just, I would like really dry stuff. And I'll bring that up. For example, I read like, rules and laws and like policies and 400-page just like not status updates, but like summaries for like government organizations, that kind of stuff. And it's not part of my job. It's just, I don't like sensationalism and really exaggerated speech, so I don't really read that kind of stuff. I read dry, logistical stuff. And oddly enough, not only do I find that interesting, I can remember that versus like, so I remember things based on like rules and numbers. Tell me a story, the story won't stick. Kind of thing. So that's what I mean by boring, is like, if you want me to remember something, try tying it to a rule or a number or something like that. Just as so when I say boring is kind of a survival thing for me, like, we need memories to be able to use, not memories. We need to be able, memories, but we need to be able to use our memory to survive. And for me, my memory works different than people who remember things based on like how sensationalized it was and stuff like that. So I'm a little bit different. It's part of why I've gotten boring and like random and weird, is just my mental processes are a bit different than kind of maybe the status quo is a way of phrasing it. So we're gonna start with Forfeit. I do not have a radical stance on Forfeit. I am okay with Forfeit. For some, that is a radical stance. I know because I've forfeited things. So the first one, gosh, I was like maybe like 7 years old, 7 years old, and it was a balance beam game of chicken. And we were on the balance beam, and like my friend and I, we weren't like really sure if we wanted to do it or not. Like, we're like, we should do it, we shouldn't do it, it looks dangerous. Like, because of this, it was a balance beam. It wasn't very high off the ground, like maybe half a foot off the ground, and it was on wood chips and stuff. But it wasn't like it really hurt to fall on the wood chips. And so we're on the balance beam, and I think we even made it on the balance beam, and I was like looking down, and I was just like, I don't have a helmet on, and there's like cement around the wood chips, and the wood chips aren't very hard. All I do is get pushed off on this game, because chicken's about pushing each other and stuff like that to get the one person to fall off the balance beam. I was like, just my luck. I do this one time and I'll fall off and hit my head. And so I got off the balance beam, and the term we used for me, forfeiting, because I didn't play. So in games, forfeit can be used in that sense where like a team can't play, or somebody refuses to participate. So that was my case where I was just like, all of a sudden, right, I didn't normally go on the balance beam, much less push people on the balance beam. So like to get up there and be like, oh, you want me to push somebody on this? You want me to get pushed on this? Hell no. So like, I guess even as a 7-year-old, I identified unnecessary risks. My dad was strategic vision and stuff like that. We were raised in a household with risk identification. It was an unnecessary risk. So me and my super analytical self, because my dad ingrained us with wise decision making, I forfeited it. Another example, this is like, I think this might have happened in our like, or my early like preteen to early teenage, preteen. We didn't, so I played soccer, recreational club soccer, and we had to, I think we had to, everybody got the flu or everybody got the cold or something like that. It was, I think it was our team. We actually had to forfeit like one game or something like that because we didn't have enough players. And if you don't have enough players, I think you can still play the game, which we might have, but like we still had to forfeit it. Like you have to have at least 7 players on the field in soccer or something. We didn't have enough players. And like usually you're supposed to have enough people to play, and like the ideal is to have substitutes too, so not everybody has to play the whole time. Like if somebody gets an injury or gets really tired or whatever, people can substitute in and out. Everybody gets practice though, or not, well, everybody gets to play that way. And we didn't, or some people got the cold and some people were traveling or something. Like it was a perfect storm and we weren't able to play, if I'm recalling that correctly. I think I am, but I'm not certain. So we had a forfeit. I do not have a negative feeling about forfeit. I think the person on the other side of this really didn't like forfeit because she wanted to see who would win. And I was just like, I'm not hurting my head. So it's a bit of like, she was so mad at me. And then in this one, I think it was actually kind of the polar opposite. Was like people were like, another win, right? So a forfeit in sports results in a loss. So like I lost both of these things. But like the team setting was oddly enough more supportive of the forfeit as a form of losing than this with my friend. I thought she was my friend. But like, yeah. So I'm not against it. I think this case where the person gets really mad that somebody's like, you know what, I'm not going to do this. Some people get really mad about that because they want to beat somebody. And that kind of thing. And like, I have no idea. I probably would have lost because I was thinking about the wood chips. So I was like, for me, I was like, it's the same outcome as it probably would have been. And my head and my body is less injured than it probably or very realistically could have been. So for me, this is a win-win, right? I'm uninjured and I still get a loss. But she didn't see it that way. She wanted to race me. And so I think some people can get mad about that because they're like, we want to race the best in the world. And it's like, well, sometimes the best in the world doesn't want to race you, right? For their own reasons. It's not, the world does not revolve around the person who still decides to compete. Like, everybody has their own reasons for doing something. And sometimes health, safety, and security needs to be taken into account. So I actually highly support forfeit as an option. I think I've had to not do things because of health reasons or family reasons or stuff like that. And so like for me, it's I value family and I value my health and stuff like that. And so it takes me, because I like or support forfeit because it's a very mature option to take. Yeah. And then betting. How do I feel about betting? I tire of it. I placed a bet when I was 12 years old. I lost a nickel. Lost 5. What is the sign for the cents? It's 5 cents. I bet the Seattle Seahawks would win the Super Bowl against the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I was like one of very few people to bet for the Seattle Seahawks. This was back in, I think it would have been the Super Bowl held in the year 2005. If I remember, it was about that time, or that time, and I lost 5 cents. And I didn't have, specifically it was 1 nickel, but I didn't have a nickel, and so I ended up paying the person like what I had, which was like a quarter or something like that. Yeah, I was just like, to get the annoyance off of me, I was just like, here's more money. That's the perk about betting 5 cents. Yeah. Okay, and then the other time, I was 28 years old. And it was horse racing. I lost 13 and made 7, so I think lost like $13, made $7. And this is where my logistical boringness comes in. So, I don't make a lot of bets. When I really don't do things for like, oh, what outcome do you think blank? And I'm just like, I'm not opposed to it. I'm not for it. Both of these meant something to me. Like, this was the betting machines. It was my first time seeing live horse racing, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to place bets. This is part of the culture. And I was alone, and I didn't know how the betting machine worked or anything like that. So it was like a huge personal growth thing. And this one was just like a bunch of, like, I'm from Seattle. This is my home. And like everybody was bidding for the Pittsburgh Steelers. It was a matter of, I don't care if the Seahawks lose. I'm betting for my team, and I only want to lose 5 cents. And then I ended up paying more than 5 cents because I was just annoyed with people. Somebody being like, can I have a nickel? I was like, here's a quarter. And so when I was 28 years old, yeah, so I tire of it. I think people can build it up so much that it actually becomes like, I would bet more than once every 16 years or 14 years on average, but because people talk about, let's bet on this, or how much would you bet blank? How much would you bet blank? How much, blah, 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 blah. Enough. So I'd say if betting and the betting culture wasn't so overhyped, I would probably bet more, but because it is so overhyped, I bet less. I don't bet very frequently. Losing $7, so, and I don't know if you're familiar with the sport of cricket, but in the sport of cricket, there's something it's called like, I think there are very particular terminologies in cricket. I think it's timed out dismissal as opposed to like a timeout. And it's where you take too long, the batter or person getting up to hit the ball or whatever, they get up, and if they're not at the place to take the bat in like 3 minutes or like 10 minutes or something like that, they strike out. But they're not striking out. They're dismissed. It's a form of being dismissed from play. So it's a timed out dismissal. So that's actually what the $7 was. I took too long at the betting machine to make a bet, and so they gave me a cash voucher, and I got I think 2 cash vouchers, and I turned them in for money. And I think that was $7 if I'm recalling correctly. And I had like $20 or something. This is approximate. This isn't exact, as far as I can recall. But yeah, that's it. Kind of. I'm okay with both. The culture of betting, I'm okay with forfeit and betting. The culture of betting, I think, is a hindrance and part of why I don't bet more.